Well, hello and welcome to Beyond the Sermon, a Bethany podcast where we have the privilege of digging deeper into our Sunday messages. I'm Tami DeLau, and today I'm joined with Pastor David Baxley and Pastor Steve Musto. You guys we're back. I mean, none of us were here. Yeah, in the right seats. None of us were here on Sunday.
Right.
And so we're going to do a flyover for a sermon that none of us experienced live, but did get to watch.
Yeah, good.
So, yeah.
All right.
So I'm so proud of Chase. He did a really good job.
He did.
So he spent time, this is for me, and you guys can tell me if I did well, I've listened well. Okay, so he was in Romans, and he told us why the law. So the first thing we see is the law is good. And one of the reasons the law is good is because it points out the problem of sin and our problem. But then he also shared that the law was weak, which is weird and hard, but weak because it's not the law that saves us. So I think that's what he's saying.
That's good.
And then the last point that he came up with was the law was unifying, just saying, I loved his analogy with the CDs. In fact, I have a confession. As he was talking about old CDs, I started thinking of the old CDs that I listened to. Went to Apple Music and, listened to a little Twilight Paris and all the old
Wow.
songs that I had CDs of. So thank you,
There were
Chase.
CDs of that?
Yeah, there were CDs.
I would have thought that was 8-tracks.
Yeah. Whoa. But the whole reason that the law is good for us is because we see God's character and then what he desires for his children.
That's good.
So did I do well?
You did great.
Okay, I wasn't
well
with you
done.
guys. Okay. So now let's jump into this week. Okay, so I know there are some passages you guys are not going to be able to cover.
Yeah.
So
from the law.
From the law specifically.
And there's some weird ones. There's some
really weird ones.
Yeah, weird laws.
So let's, before we jump into actually what you're going to talk about on Sunday, let's hit some of those laws.
Oh, okay. We're going to stump the pastor.
Yeah, we're going to play.
She starts with the weirdest one I remember.
Okay, all right. Well, the one that I'm wondering about is why couldn't they boil a baby goat in its mother's milk? What are we seeing about God and his desires there?
Yeah, that is an actual law, Exodus 23. Do not boil a kid or a baby goat in its mother's milk. Why would God forbid this of all things? There's a lot of discussion about this, actually. And there's not like one thing. It's like, well, this is obvious. But what it comes down to fundamentally is it's not kind. It's not right. It goes against something in nature. It bothers us a little bit if we think about it. You go, oh yeah, there's something kind of twisted about that. So what God is doing in his law is he is driving us towards what the created order. This is what is the most natural thing. So he is against anything that is not natural, and he's trying to move people away from anything that is going to lead them down the road of doing that which he did not create the world to do. So there's something just kind of, I don't know, I think we'd call it like skeevy about it. Like, that's weird.
So why?
Well, I think it also, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I think it reminds us of, even when you think of this, what are we doing? We have a mother that gave birth to a goat. We killed. We have to eat. There's this nature of death and life that is in the order of things, but it's not God's design. And it's just to remind us to put redemptive elements into the brokenness of sin in the world that we live in. God wants still to, even though it's not completed, he's still reminding us to redeem as his people, as Israel, his people, to redeem what is broken in his name and to remind us to show God's compassion and kindness in the middle of brokenness and death and hard.
So it's not going back to before mankind was vegetarian. It's going back to a mother should be nurturing. So to use a mother's milk to her. I'm trying to understand what makes it Hebe. Is that what makes it Hebe?
Yeah,
okay.
it is using, I'm going to take this, so put it in our terms. Okay. I'm going to take this animal away from its own mother. I'm going to slaughter the animal. and then I'm going to prepare it with its own mother's milk. Is just like
what should have been giving it life
yes,
is now being used.
Yeah, that's great, Tami. That's good right there. That is great.
That's a way.
Yes.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yes.
Okay.
And generally speaking, we want these like hard and fast rules for a lot of these things, and a lot of it just goes back to it's not right.
Okay.
It's just not right.
Okay.
And we're seeing God's heart in that. It reminds me, years ago, I was training for a triathlon, and I was eating a big breakfast, and Kathy and I found this new breakfast place, and I ordered an omelet with a bunch of stuff in it, and I wasn't even thinking about it. And it came, and I realized that one of the things that was in the omelet was chicken. So I had chicken in the thing that produced the chicken, and I had never eaten an omelet with chicken in it before. And I just made a comment to Kathy about, there's probably something in like Leviticus about this. Don't eat a chicken in an egg, the chicken and the egg. I don't know. Okay. But it actually caused me pause for a minute. Like, this is odd.
Okay.
This is just a little odd. And that catch is, I think there's something behind that.
Well, that's where Chase took us at the end of the message last week.
That was awesome.
Yeah. To remind us that we always want to be looking at the law to see what is it trying to show us about God's heart.
Yeah.
So we, instead of saying, why this rule, we ask the question, what does God want me to see about his heart?
Yeah.
And then it just changes. And that's what we just did in this, and another great example of that.
There's a natural order to things. This interrupts the natural order.
Okay. Here's another one.
Yeah.
This one, we find this one in Exodus 22. Why, guys, can I not kill I can only kill a burglar at night. I cannot kill a burglar during the day.
Yeah. So this is actually related, believe it or not, to the goat thing. So you think about it like this. So in order for someone to break into your house today, they break a window or whatever. That's not how you did it. Ancient world. You dug through the wall. That's how you got into somebody's house, because they were mud houses mostly, made out of mud. So you dug through a wall. When the people of Israel were nomads, wasn't even that. You just lifted up the tent flap and crawled underneath. But for the most part, these were, homes that were not built out of rocks. They were built out of wall. And even if it was built out of rocks, you could just displace the rocks, just move them and crawl in. All right. So what's going on here? Well, if someone is trying to break into your home, our world, we say, well, it's fair. They're just fair game. We can do whatever we want to them. But that's not the world that God is establishing. That's not the people or the kingdom that he wants established. Fundamentally, there's a kindness that runs through the nation of Israel, because there's a kindness inherent in our Heavenly Father. And so if there's light and somebody is breaking into your home for a reason, you can see that person. And there are other ways of dealing with that. You can see who they are. You can see if they're hungry. You can see if, they're malnourished. You can see if they're part of the nation of Israel or not. There's all kinds of things that you can see. So again, there's a world different from ours, because you can't just turn lights on. But at night, you can't see any of those things. And so at night it is, well, all bets are off. Protect your family and those within your house. So no matter what you have to do, you kind of have to do that. But if you can see this person, you need to be careful before you just act out and do something that is going to harm them.
So you said kindness, the word that comes to my mind, it demonstrates God's mercy even to those that are guilty.
Yeah.
That's what God does, right? Like, so when someone breaks in, they're guilty, but God has created a way of showing kindness and mercy to them in the middle of their crime. And I love the word you use, to see them.
Yeah. God
still sees the guilty in a way that he doesn't just want to say, well, now you've done a crime, all bets are off. No, now you've done a crime. I want you to still, I want to create a way to show you my mercy and compassion. And I want my people to do the same.
So is it stretching it too far that regardless if you're hurting a person, that person is created in the image of God?
Yeah.
So is there that?
Absolutely.
That's there also.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is, mercy is a great word for it. There's just this compassion, mercy, kindness that runs through the law. And so we need to be people of mercy and compassion and kindness. So, I've said this before a couple of times in a message. When we, in our world, when we have glee and joy about the thought of someone breaking into our house, because then we get to do whatever then we get to unleash on them. We get to, use a weapon of some kind on them, whatever it is. When there's, or I'm in the convenience store and somebody comes in and tries to rob it, I'm looking forward to that. That is exactly the wrong attitude. Mm-hmm. That's exactly the wrong heart. That is not the heart God has.
Well, and we're reminded of that. I think it's Ezekiel, where God reminds us, people, do not rejoice in the death of your enemy.
Yeah.
God says, I don't rejoice in the death of the enemy. Like, even if God executes it, there's no joy in him in that.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm going to start reading some verses because you're talking about slavery.
Yep.
And so I think a disclaimer that we should have is there are going to be people listening and they're going to go, I don't get it. Why did God not just stop slavery? He could have just abolished it. That would be good. Slavery is wrong. You're going to touch that on Sunday.
Yeah.
So we're avoiding that
today.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk, we'll unpack
intermixed.
Why wouldn't God just say, hey, you guys, slavery is not cool. Yep. Knock it off. I don't want any of you to own slaves, and I certainly don't want you to be slaves. Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't God do that?
Yeah. And that's what you'll do on Sunday.
Yeah, we'll talk about that on Sunday.
All right. Well, then let's look for God's character and God's desire in these verses. So Exodus 20, verses 20 and 21. When a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod, and the slave dies under his abuse, the owner must be punished. However, if the slave can stand up after a day or two, the owner should not be punished because he is the owner's property. Should we just tackle one verse at a time?
No, read the other one.
Read the other one? Okay.
Read the other one.
So this one is found in Leviticus 25, verses 44 through 46. Your male and female slaves are to be from the nations around you. You may purchase male and female slaves. You may also purchase them from the aliens residing with you, or from their families living among you, those born in your land. These may become your property. You may leave them to your sons after you to inherit as property. You can make them slaves for life. That is hard for our 2024 American sensibilities to stomach.
I just want to do a call back to last year, October 29th. You taught on this.
Yeah.
Slavery in the New Testament context.
Mm-hmm.
So a different context.
Mm-hmm.
And in the New Testament context, what's a little bit easier about that idea, that concept, is that they didn't have any power. The people who Paul was writing to had no power. They lived in the Roman Empire. Roman Empire was built on slavery. The entire economic system of the Roman Empire was slave labor. And all the households, everything worked according to slaves. It was a huge deal. Slaves were on the money that they exchanged. Slaves were, there were just laws and rules around it. It was a huge part of their economy. But the Roman Empire was corrupt. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about it, it's like, well, how do you live in a world where slavery exists? Okay, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a world that God is dictating the rules of, and he says, here's what you do with your slaves.
This feels more complicated.
It is a little bit more complicated. Yeah. So the first thing we have to do is to define what the word means. What does slavery mean? Because we have a concept of what slavery is that is not the concept of the Old Testament world. And we'll unpack this more in the message. But there are three kinds of slavery in the ancient world. There is, and it depends on who you are. So are these Hebrews? Are these fellow Israelites? Or are these foreigners? That determines something.
That's the first division.
That's the first division. So chattel slaves would be those who are from foreign countries. They might be refugees of war. They might be those carried off from war after a nation has been conquered and their cities burned to the ground. There might be, foreigners who, for whatever reason, are living among the Israelite people. So their slavery was permitted of those folks. But then there are rules for that, and then there are rules for those who are within the Hebrew community, like debt slavery, for instance. So the best way to explain this is, let's say, Tami, that I owe you $10,000 and I can't pay it. So in what God didn't want from his people, God never wanted his people, and he designed a world, a system where poverty did not exist. There should be no poor among you, he said. And the reason is because of this thing that he put in place. So everybody has their own land. Everybody has their own property. Whatever they can, they have. They can farm on it. They can raise animals on it. They can raise their family on it. They can do all kinds of things with it. But if I owe you money, either because it was a rough growing season and I made some mistakes, or I got injured during the year and I couldn't farm, or I did something wrong, and to you, and I need to now pay you remuneration for that. What I could do if I didn't have that money, I mean, you could throw me into jail, but what good does that do anybody? So instead of that, what God designed was this system of kind of welfare, where I would send usually a son or a daughter, some relative of mine would come over and work for you.
Okay.
And we would work out exactly how much they were going to work and how much their work was worth. There was sort of a standard wage of the day. This is how much it's worth. And so this is how much they need to work in order to pay off that $10,000. This is all predicated on every 7 years, the whole idea of the Jubilee. So there are 7 sevens. Every 7 years, the debts kind of get reset, and they get reset in this way. So let's say we are in year 2 since the last Jubilee. I owe you $10,000. We're going to calculate, all right, how long is it going to take within this 5 years? How much work needs to be done? Because we only have 5 years left until the next Jubilee. How much work needs to be done in order for us to get to that $10,000 mark? It might be twice a week, 3 times a week that my son comes over and mows your lawn or whatever. But it might be every day. They might have to live at your house. That might be part of the deal. But here's the guarantee. At the end of that time, at the next Jubilee, A, you will have been made whole because the work would have been done. And B, every single Hebrew slave gets to go free. Everybody gets to go free. So our son would return back
It's like
to our
Ollie
house.
and come home.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, there's no welfare. And the other deal is this. God made sure that you didn't charge interest on the money. So if I owe you money, it doesn't accumulate interest. So there's like no cycle of debt. It's $10,000 is $10,000, period. But what what all of this builds to is the 7th seven. The 7th seven is the year of Jubilee, which is the 49th year, the 50th year, however you calculate it, where all slaves in Israel go free. Everybody goes free. Foreign slaves go free, and these servants who are involved in these kinds of deals. So all of this idea of slavery is encompassed by the word slave. So you have debt, people who are in debt to each other, including like criminals and whatever. You have people who have sold their children, which we'll talk about in a minute. Everybody gets to go free. And then you have the folks who are from foreign nations who've been carried off from battle or whatever. They get to go free too. So that's kind of the idea of, behind slavery.
And so the character that we're seeing in God in those verses, we're seeing, what are we seeing? It's still really hard for me.
It should be hard for us.
Okay.
Yeah, what we're seeing from God, first of all, is that there's no such thing as a cycle of poverty. God doesn't believe in that. There's always an opportunity for you to get out of poverty. There's always a way for you to be, in their world, use their language, to be redeemed. You'd be redeemed.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think it demonstrates God's justice and redemption at the same time, in a sense of, if I owe you 10,000, there's an injustice if I just say, well, I don't care. Because now you suffer because I don't care. So there's a community of justice within it's economics, and there is a way of doing economics corruptly, and there's a way of doing economics in a way that is just, that is caring, that is compassionate, that is how do we create a way to meet all the needs of the community and still create a way of release and redemption and freedom in that. And I think that's what all these laws are ultimately about. It's not about power and control. It's about community of people living to meet needs and justice and honor each other, but always provide a way of redemption. That fits no other culture of slavery that has ever existed in time.
That's all good and great. And I know we have the 10 Commandments, and too bad we didn't all live by them. But the 10 Commandments show us our need for Jesus. I am assuming the mess that we've seen the Israelites be in, they didn't live this way. Did they had poor people, right? I mean, it was just more laws showing us our need at some level, right?
Yeah. So let's first of all, let's look at a practical example of how this works. So if you've ever read the book of Ruth, what you have is Naomi, who returns from Moab to Israel.
After she lost her husband.
She lost her husband. She goes to acquire back his land, but his land is, she can't do anything with it. She's a woman in that culture. There's nothing she can really do. So if you remember this whole convoluted story, Boaz goes to their nearest relative, the kinsman, so a kin is a family member, redeemer, someone who's going to buy you, and goes to the nearest relative, Boaz does, and says, hey, there's this piece of land that you can redeem. You're the closest family member. You can buy it. And the guy says, great, I'll buy it. And Boaz says, okay, no problem. Now, I want you to know that it comes with Naomi and her daughter-in-law, Ruth. And the guy says, well, wait a second.
No, thank you.
That's going to mess up my inheritance stuff. I've got, a trust in place. So that's going to mess, it's going to mess all that up. I can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So who's next on the list? And Boaz goes, oh, look, it's me. And the guy says, okay, well, do you want to buy it? And Boaz says, sure, I'll buy it. So they exchange sandals. That's what they would do in those days. And that's how he receives the land, but he also buys the service, as it were, of Naomi, because now he has to support Naomi. It's her land. It belongs to her husband. So he has to support her living on the land, and there's got to be an economic arrangement for her farming that land in some way, or giving him a portion of what comes off of that land. And he acquires Ruth as well, who is a marriable woman. And at this point, he would be expected to bring her in and marry her if he could, or marry her to a son or something like that, if he had a son, so that she is provided for.
Yeah, it's a great story of the economics of power. Says the first guy, why not take it? I'm just going to take the land and I'll use Ruth and Naomi for whatever I want, because I don't have to care for them. But he knew a biblical responsibility had to care and demonstrate God's compassion and justice to the suffering, to the powerless that were there, and realized what that would cost him, and said, okay, I can't take that responsibility. And then so Boaz said, I'll take that responsibility, not for the reward, but for the responsibility of caring for these two ladies who didn't have power, didn't have someone to care, and to extend the name of their family.
Yeah.
But even before it got to that point, the fact that he wasn't gleaning the outer edges of his field,
Correct.
He was obeying the Old Testament law.
He was.
Because then those who were without could come and get grain from.
Right. So this is
he
another
was a good guy.
Yeah, this is another piece of that welfare system.
Right.
Where God says, look, I want you to be able to mortgage your land to other people. But the land ultimately belongs to you. And all at that 50th year, and the year of Jubilee, all the land goes back to who it originally was, who it originally belonged to. And so I could, if I owe you the $10,000, I can say, look, I can't pay for this. One way I could pay for it is you essentially buy the land from me that I own. We'll call it even, and we'll farm that. So I'll just take enough for my family to live on. You take the rest of what that land produces. And that is the deal up until
the
year of Jubilee. And then I get all that back. And if there's any outstanding debt left, it is reset to zero. But that was the idea. So that's why there are going to be years where there's drought, which is what drove them from Israel into Moab and from, to begin with. There's going to be years of drought. There's going to be years where the crops don't produce, or I'm growing something different than you, and there's a blight and whatever. So some people might be wealthier than others at certain times, but it's supposed to equal out. So this sets the whole table for hospitality and what God expects of his people in that world.
Yeah, and I mean, it may be important to note, sometimes we use the word poor. We think someone that doesn't have much is someone who might be wealthy. And I think it's recognized that even in this situation, you had people that could be better off than someone else. And that was not a definition of injustice.
Yeah.
The idea of poor was that I can't care for myself. I can't get food. I can't feed. Like, it's not just an element of I have less than someone else greater than me. There's the difference. It's a true element of I can't meet it. Hence the poor could get the free grain because they didn't have a way of getting the food they needed to survive. And so I think it's just important to recognize it's not that in God's economy that everything is always equal, the same. And the goal is to always create this equality of everyone has the exact same, but more that everyone is cared for. Every need is met. God's compassion and mercy is flowing through these relationships and through these laws.
I still don't like slavery, guys. It's just these verses are so hard.
I was talking to Chase about this, and he said, I think you should start the message with, look, I don't care what this cost me. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I am against slavery. I just want everybody to know that. Right. So, I mean, of course. And that's part of the challenge is why are we talking about this? And we'll even talk about that in the message as well.
Okay. So other nations, if they were living like this, or there were enough Boazes that were part of their world, that others were seeing love and compassion and valuing human life, that would have looked very different than the cultures that around them.
Yes, for the most part. But even the Code of Hammurabi, which predates the Mosaic Law, provided a way for you to leave slavery. I think the rule with Hammurabi was every 3 years or something.
Okay.
So there, the concept is there. God just codifies it for his people and puts it into a system.
Are there any more verses you guys want to look at?
Yeah, I think let's talk about Exodus 21 verses 2-4. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he is to serve for 6 years. Then in the 7th, he is to leave as a free man without paying anything. If he arrives alone, he's to leave alone. If he arrives with a wife, his wife is to leave with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children belong to her master, and the man must leave alone.
If I wasn't happy before, this one's really getting my goat.
Yeah. Oh, we have one more to go that is going to be worse.
Okay.
But let's talk about this one.
Okay.
So this is the context of debt slavery. So we're going back to debt slavery again. And the key to this whole thing is when you buy a Hebrew slave. All right. So let's, as much as we can possibly do it, we need to divorce ourselves from our notion of slavery, which is going to another people, going to some other continent, kidnapping them, bringing them to our continent, breeding them for sale, mistreatment, all those things. Okay, that's the
power,
slavery.
Abuse, all those
it's all about power. It's all about, and because they're a different color, and nobody's going to miss them. So let's get that notion of slavery out of our minds for just a moment, because that's not what this is. So this is when someone is indebted to you. Let's just walk through the passage. So when someone is indebted to you, he's to serve you for 6 years. In the 7th, he's to leave. We talked about this as a free man without paying anything. In other words, he's already paid his debt. His debt is paid. So whatever he has worked for, however long he's worked for you, that's it. That's as much as he needs to pay. He doesn't have to pay you an exit fee or something like that to win his freedom. So if he's by himself, that's great. If he is with his wife and both of them are working for you, both of them get to leave. That would make sense. But what's this? If the master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children belong to her master, and the man must leave alone. So God provides a way for a free man to leave. And again, this concept is foreign to us, but very much part of their culture. The idea would be, if he's being let go and he is now free to do what he wants, where does he go? Who knows? Mm-hmm. Who knows? He doesn't have anywhere to go. He's been a slave. Mm-hmm. He's been a servant. He's been living with his master for a certain amount of time under his care and protection. He doesn't have anything. He may have some skills, but it's going to take him a while to get to a point where he can make some money. The idea is that he can come back and redeem, buy the debt, buy his family out from under whatever debt that they still owe. What's meant to happen
There's
here.
There's hope there?
Oh, total hope.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Huge hope. This would be cruel. Think about it this way.
Yes.
This would be cruel to have a family working for you. Don't think beating slaves. Think you have a family that works for you. Mm-hmm. You're treating them well. Deuteronomy says that they're to be like family members to you, to eat at your table. They love you. You love them. He's free. You kick the whole family out. Say, I'm sorry, you guys just have to go find someplace to live. And they're like, we don't have anywhere to go. We don't know what to do.
I just see the baby clinging to the daddy as he's walking away. Like, I just can hardly.
So that's why he doesn't have to leave if he doesn't want to. And God provides for that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, also, I think we create this image, even that story, that somehow he's going across the country.
Right.
Like this is a community of people. They stay within a community. Again, it's the weirdest concept for us to understand, but this isn't like the power narrative. This is, this person owed a debt. There was a way for them to pay off their debt, to provide justice while I cared for them and still take care of their needs. And now is a release. They're now entering the redemptive season where they get to rebuild and restore. So I'm actually still taking care of his wife and kids while he's rebuilding and restoring. So then he can come back and redeem them as well and bring back into a place that is healthy and safe for them to continue to experience God's redemption in their lives as well. Like, this is the story. It's care, it's compassion, but because it's all understanding the reality of economics, of food, of shelter, of need. And it's, so that image you have is, I understand why we have that image, right? But that's not what was happening. It wasn't this guy's leaving and he's chained the kids and the wife down to the staircase in the basement.
But you can totally understand someone who hasn't grown up in the church, does not believe in the depth of their being that God is good. Right. And you read this and you're like, no, thank you. Yep. And you walk away. Yep. The next one's worse.
Yeah. Okay. The next one's worse. You want to read it?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to read it. So Exodus 21, verse 7 through 11. When a man sells his daughter as a concubine, she is not to leave as the male slaves do.
All right. So she's not to leave as male slaves do at the 7th year.
Okay. So she's stuck there.
Yep.
Beautiful. If she is displeasing to her master who chooses her for himself, then he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has acted treacherously towards her. Or if he chooses her for his sons, he must deal with her according to the customary treatment of daughters. If he takes an additional wife, he must not reduce the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife. And if he, this is so hard I can hardly read it, you guys. And if he does not do these 3 things for her, she may leave free of charge without any payment. So first of all, we have
concubine.
Father selling his daughter as a concubine. And concubine doesn't mean she's just going to clean in the kitchen. Nope. She is being used sexually. That's
no.
Okay, good. Then help me understand.
Yep. So this is, again, we have a concept of what the word concubine means, and it does not mean to them what it means to us. This Bible's not written to us, written for us. So this is a very typical, this is the usual scenario for how women get married. So let's fast forward to the New Testament for a moment. We have the story, we actually have 2 different stories of women who anoint the feet of Jesus. In at least one of those stories, the woman takes her dowry and anoints Jesus with perfume. Remember? All right. So a dowry is what? A dowry is a payment that a woman's family would make to a husband's family to marry their daughter. Sometimes that is the direction of the economic situation that the bride's family would pay to have their daughter married. Sometimes it would go the other way, and they would pay something called a bride price. And a groom would pay the bride's family to marry the groom. And how do you determine bride price dowry? It just depends. Depends on the situation. Depends whether you're marrying up, marrying down in the social strata, who has land, who doesn't.
Economic needs of the families.
Needs, exactly.
Yes.
All of these
for
things.
care and being taken care of.
Yeah. It's a different world. Okay. So this is a father who is selling, as it were, his daughter. It's an arranged marriage, and saying, what's the price here? What's the deal? And the guy who's selling to agrees on a price, pays that. Everyone got married this way. This was not rare. Nobody fell in love. This is not a rare thing.
You go on dates.
No, you didn't go on dates. Everybody got sold one way or another or redeemed in this way.
So she was his wife then.
So look at the wording.
Yeah.
She, the reason she doesn't leave, as the male slaves do, is because he's married her. This is why he bought her. He bought her to either marry him or marry his son or something like that. So the language changes in verse 10. If he takes an additional wife, so this is somebody he's married. He must not reduce the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife. So if he marries somebody else while he's married to this person, he's not allowed to treat her like a slave. He has to continue to provide for her whole life in his house.
Care for her, honor her in a way God says she must be honored.
Yeah. And if he doesn't do any of those things, then she can say, you are no longer a husband to me, and she can leave and probably go back to her father's house. So that would be like a divorce. So this is not selling your kid into slavery. This is all about the normal financial transaction of the day, which just seems strange to our ears, of bride price, dowry, whatever it might be, and how they are to be treated. And again, you see mercy and grace and compassion in this. Women are not allowed to be treated as property.
Just like Jesus does in the New Testament and lifts up women in a culture that demeans them, God is also doing this in the Old Testament. In this, he's saying, therefore, she should be seen this way, cared this way, valued this way. And if any of that is not met, any of it, she's released.
Yeah.
Like you have no ground for having any reason or excuse to not care for her to the highest standard that I've set.
Yeah.
And if you do not, she is released from you and you lose out and she is redeemed. Like, this is God's story of protection.
So this is the issue with reading the Bible through Western modern eyes.
And you have a term for that.
Yeah.
What I can't even
Anachronism.
pronounce. Anachronism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we'll revisit that in the message. Anachronism, the idea that we're putting our culture back on the ancient culture and saying, well, I know what they believe. I know what that word means. No, we don't.
We approach all comparisons to figure out which is best. Just like we began to talk about, even in the New Testament and the Old Testament, God is not trying to say which culture is the best culture.
Yeah.
God is trying to say, when my people are a part of a culture, how do they demonstrate and live out my compassion, my mercy, my value for life, my recognizing people are created in the image of God? How do you give them dignity? Whatever the laws of the land might be, how is that the heart of God demonstrated through my people into the world that which they're placed in?
This is one of those things where I know God is good, but I read these and like the gentleman said, I believe, help my unbelief. It's like, I know you're good. Help me know you're good. Because it doesn't look good.
Doesn't look good.
Yeah, it doesn't look good.
No, and you totally understand why people open the Bible.
Yeah. That's right.
read something like this and close it. I mean, Christopher Hitchens, wrote a best-selling book. One of the chapters is on the ruthless, violent God of the Old Testament, who does things like this and says, "Oh yeah, it's fine to own people." And let's not forget our own history in this country, and going back to Europe as well, where slavery became something that it was not. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that slavery in the ancient world was somehow like better slavery. It was like a better way to be bought and sold. I'm not saying that. Slavery is morally unconscionable. But there's a reason why God doesn't just say, it ends here, we're not going to do it anymore. And why he instead chooses to put very careful, very merciful rules around how you are to treat one another.
Well, I wish it was Sunday and we could jump into what you're going to teach us. Thank you guys. This is fun. And thank you for joining us. Have a great week. Bye-bye.